Hi folks, with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about a number of media articles that have been doing the rounds that the West is suffering demographic collapse, that is in overall population terms. Now, quite a few little statistical tricks are used to do this, but there's a huge amount of alarmism. One online news outfit, which is very left wing, they're saying that because of Donald Trump and the reduction in the mass migration, all this sort of stuff, that there's no one left to do any jobs in America. There's just nobody there. Nobody in the whole of America. No one, all these jobs, no one to do them. Just nobody. And that's, of course, you couldn't dream up a more absurd headline and an assertion than that. But this is the sort of stuff that's going around at the moment. Now, just the tiniest little drill down, and you can see that it is nonsense making such claims that there are no workers. There are just simply no workers left in America. None, anywhere. Which is population over 300 million. There's no workers. Yeah, right, sure. So let's just have a little look at that. Now, the claim was based on that for the first time in 20 years, I think it was, that the American population in the United States population has declined. They declined by a minuscule amount, by the way. I think it was something in the order of 200,000 or even less than that. And this was attributed to the Trump administration's clamp down on illegal mass migration and mass migration generally, but also the deporting of criminal legal aliens and people that were choosing to self-deport rather than run the risk of being captured by the immigration authorities and so on. So on this basis, now we need to put some perspective. This was put forward as this is a disaster. The American population, the US population, has declined by 200,000 or 180,000, I think it was. This is again with a population well over 300 million. So 180,000 is irrelevant. Like the 180,000, what was it? Were they all young, fit, highly educated workers? Were they toilet cleaners? Were they children? Were they elderly people that weren't working at all? Were they all on welfare benefits and not working? There was no breakdown of that. It simply presented that the population has declined, and therefore this is a disaster. And it was billed as this is a demographic collapse. No workers anywhere, which again is quite ridiculous. So let's just have a little look at that. Now these doom merchants who come out with this demographic collapse stuff, they play around with the stats. So on one side, they say that, in one set of statistics, they say that the actual citizen population has declined because the deaths have exceeded births. Okay, now that's factually, you can prove that factually. So all right, then that's now that this has been the scenario for quite some time. Now you could argue, well, encourage people to have more children. Put incentives in place for people to get married, have families, have children, buy houses, have a stake in society, in the future of society. Well, why not do that? Because there are very few incentives for that these days. Very few. Why not do that? But that's not touched on. It's just purely a case that the population is declining. Women just aren't having as many children. Therefore, the only solution, no other solution is available, is to have high levels of immigration from third world shithole countries by low IQ brown and black people, very few of whom turn into being productive citizens. Some do, but very few. So they always come back to that as being the only solution, which demonstrates, of course, the propaganda motivation behind the articles. But coming back, so the first thing is, well, women are having fewer children. Okay, we can accept that that's statistically true or factually true. And in cases, say, where there's quite severe winters or something like that, or there's flu epidemics, I don't know. So those sorts of things, the number of deaths may bump up a little bit. And people, but these are the people who are dying are people who are in their 80s 90s, and they're not working anyway. So you're not losing any workers when people in their 90s are dying. So to try and present that as, well, look, there's no one to do the work, that's a lie. It's just a complete untruth. So births by definition are newborn, people, and the deaths when they're, if you look at, say, it's the average age of the deaths was 87 or something like that. So you're not losing workers there at all. There are people who are dying in, nursing homes or whatever, dropping dead at 87 from a heart attack or something like that. But again, you're not losing workers at that point. Now, the next level they go to is by looking just at citizens. But then they do a pirouette and they do a double shuffle and then start using of the gross population, including estimates as to how many illegals are in the country. There have been a few articles about Britain, France, United States, Canada, and I think some other Western countries, where again they've tried to project the population is declining. Now, the tiniest population decline, it can decline by one person. This is then presented as some sort of disaster in the making. Why is it not a disaster to have millions of people parasiting off the welfare system that do nothing productive at all? Why isn't that presented as being a disaster? But no, it's not. That's just airbrushed out. No, that's not a problem. That's not a problem. All these illiterate third world IQ 70 peasants. Nah, that's not a problem. But yes, it is. It is a problem. So they're inventing through fevered imagination one problem, that if the population stagnates or goes down even by the tiniest amount, and even after years of masses of population increase due to illegals and mass immigration and coming in from the third world, that's all fine. But the minute that stops or slows or even goes backwards slightly, then it's a demographic collapse, or so they claim. Now, on one hand, they look at the citizens and say, well, look at the number of citizens, then without, through sleight of hand, they then add in or subtract as they feel, in order to make their propaganda point, the amount of illegals. Now, during the years of the globalist Biden administration, and Biden didn't know what day it was just the globalist goons around him, somewhere in the region of, depending on whose numbers you look at, by the way, somewhere in the region of 10 to 13 million people, both legal and illegal, came into the United States during those 4 years. Just in the last 2 years alone, there was some in the order of 8 million, again, legal and illegal, coming into the country. So this is a massive influx of people in percentage and actual terms. How many of those were? The majority of them were illiterate third world peasants, but not all. Now, they're not going to be doing valuable work. They're going to be low wage workers. That's something there. So businesses that otherwise couldn't or wouldn't survive can be kept on life support by all this cheap under the table third world peasant labour. But it's not really a boon or a benefit to the economy at all. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But there's this massive influx came in, of which this article that says the US is beginning demographic collapse made no mention of that, not even anywhere that there was this massive influx of people over those 4 years. And if it drops back by a few 100,000, then who cares? There's been this massive wave of people coming in earlier. So they're not looking at that at all and just saying, well, if the population declines by even one person, that it's equivalent to a demographic collapse, it's a disaster. And then they jump straight to, well, it's just no workers. There's no workers anywhere to do the job, which again is ridiculous. So they'll add in the illegals when it suits them to make their propaganda point. Then they'll ignore them when it suits them to make a different propaganda point. And then they'll ignore that the deaths, older people dying, aren't workers anyway. They're presenting that these deaths are people that are working and producing and creating and building. No, they're not. they're all drooling in nursing homes, for goodness sakes. So this is the extent and the desperation levels that get associated with the propaganda. Now, for certainly following World War II, there was a heavy emphasis in the West on efficiency, productive efficiency, efficiency of education, efficiency of knowledge, application, industry, conscientious, all the hardworking. There was really a focus on efficiency, and I regret this was sort of starting to go on the way out when I was at school. I remember at junior school. Junior school, there was a real emphasis on finding what people's natural skill or ability were. There was a kid who was really good at drawing, for example, and he was encouraged to pursue that. It's a girl too, I knew was very good at drawing. She was encouraged to pursue that, and why don't you go to special drawing classes or art classes, painting, these sorts of things. There were kids who were very gifted at music. They were encouraged to do that. So it wasn't just straight maths and science and the English. It wasn't just that. There was that. There was this guy who was very gifted at poetry. He could just write poems, and they were quite good. Even as a kid, I used to say, gee, that's not bad. So at high school, and he was encouraged to get involved in poetry. The teachers would say, well, have you heard of these poets? Have you read this? And they'd give him a bibliography, like a reading list of great poets and so on, encouraging that. So there's a lot of that focusing on efficiency. And it was changing into the, everyone gets a participation trophy. It was or in the throes of beginning to, particularly in high school, I noticed that. Even the final year of primary school, you could see that sort of stuff starting to take shape as I think back now. But this has changed. Efficiency and so on is not the issue now. Population, consumer mass is the issue. So the idea of highly educated, efficient people making consumer choices, life choices, these sorts of things, that's something that the globalist cabals, no, we don't really want that. The idea of people making their own decisions and their own choices as to what they buy or don't buy, or use or don't use, or whatever. No, we don't want that. We want people to be programmable and controllable, and efficiency is no longer the issue because we're going to pump into the Western countries all these brown and black peasants from the third world. And so we want a total consumer mass, and we want to have every essential in life, whether it be water, food, energy, housing, whatever it is, transport, that everything is controlled by the government in a public-private partnership with international monopolies, and that people are forced to buy those things. Everything they need, they're forced to buy it, and they have to buy it. And the way that'll become, because they've got reduced purchasing power, the reason they'll be able to afford that is because we'll mathematically calculate what they can afford to pay, and we'll put everyone sort of on that level, and then consumer mass and mass consumer consumption of the essentials of life through monopoly, oligopoly, and cartels will be how the economies of the future will be structured. And we're almost there now, and we're halfway to that point now. Sure, there's some small businesses that are competitive and imaginative and innovative, all this sort of thing. But the reality is that if you look at anything you buy, the stuff you have to have is discretionary. That's different. But if it's the stuff you have to have, food, water, energy, etc., that you're buying that through effectively a cabal. Now, whether it's a cabal at the back door through the big finance and the banks and so on, or at the front door, at the front end, in as much as you've got to pay the energy company to get your electricity, it doesn't really matter. But the consumer mass is now the issue. So rather than have 50 million, for example, a population of 50 million efficient people, or mostly efficient people, or many of whom are efficient, making choices and consumer choices and so on, why not have 150 million people where effectively no one gets to make a choice, but you've got a much bigger consumer mass, and if the only place they can go to get their energy is here or there, then huge profits can be realized through monopolizing and oligopolies and so on. So there's very different social structures are being put in place without the consent of the people, by the way. The only disruptor to that at the moment is the administration of President Trump. Every other Western country is getting to that point that I've just mentioned there as fast as they can do it. But overall population mass, thus consumer mass, thus purchasing from monopolies or being required to by law to purchase monopolies, that's how things are going. And again, they're well on the way. And so this is why any sort of population stagnation or even the most minuscule population decline is presented as a demographic collapse, a disaster, an Armageddon, an apocalypse, and so on. Now, for my sort of understanding of the world, I think it's much better to have 50 million efficient than 150 million IQ 70 people. But that's not the way the globalists perceive it. And what was considered to be standard practice in education, certainly and this is in my lifetime. It's not like I'm a million years old or something. I'm in my 60s, but I remember these things. It's just how it was. How different it is today. And you see studies that come out of, or tests that come out of universities where they give university graduates today, fresh graduates to university, and they give them a high school third grade mathematics test from the 1970s, and nearly half of the college grads flunk it. And other basic sort of tests, just adding, subtracting fractions and these sorts of things, stuff that I can do in my head, just looking at them. And again, basic stuff, 25-30% are failing those tests. And that seems insane. How could you actually get to university and not be able to do basic arithmetic? It's not like it's the high end of the calculus stuff or something like that. So this is something that the decline in education means a decline in discernment and the ability to ask the questions, which is of course key. Demography is being used as a propaganda political tool to suggest that anything other than mass migration is a bad thing, and the lies and the untruths, the quite grotesque untruths they're prepared to tell to push this propaganda is just off the charts. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.